Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to spend some time in the first hour talking with our in-studio guest. And if you've listened to this program, you know that you have already heard part of the interview that I've done with her before. Michele Rigby Assad is the author of the book Breaking Cover: My Secret Life in the CIA and What It Taught Me About What's Worth Fighting For. Now, if you watch certain television programs, you've also seen her on that as well. And we are privileged to have her in studio for a couple of reasons. First of all, she's in town. But second of all, she will be speaking tonight at the Hope Center. We've talked about the Hope Center before. Sue Bailey's been with us, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. It's part of what is called their Critical Conversations event, and she'll be speaking tonight. And if you would like to actually still schedule a chance to attend that event, we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. So see whether or not your Thursday night is free, and you would have a chance to meet her, to hear her, to get a copy of her book, and to actually be blessed by some of the things that she'll be sharing. If you're not familiar with her, Michele Rigby Assad is a former undercover officer, worked for a Central Intelligence Agency, as you might imagine. We'll get into all the story in just a minute. Married to Joseph, so that many times they, as she said in the book, they had a twofer because they both were involved in the clandestine service. And one of my connections with her, she's a graduate of Georgetown University. Your graduate degree from Georgetown, so is mine from Georgetown. So it is great to have you in studio today.
Thank you so much for having me, Kerby.
Okay, one of the things you start out with in your book, and almost any interview I've watched you do, is, I never really planned to be a spy. Let's get you from Florida to at least Georgetown, and all that time, there wasn't anything in your life that would suggest that you would actually work for the CIA, right?
Not at all. I am just a simple kid from Central Florida, and I didn't know much about the world. In fact, we didn't travel. I didn't have a passport. My parents didn't discuss politics or foreign affairs. But I discovered that I had a passion for foreign cultures.
Yes.
And once I realized that, I started trying to get abroad as often as I could. So that started with a mission trip to Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And then in college, mission trips to Russia, Ukraine. And then I studied abroad for a semester in Cairo. And that really cemented my passion for the Middle East. And eventually that passion took me to Georgetown. And I got recruited out of Georgetown by the CIA.
Yes. Well, again, let's talk about the CIA for just a minute, because if nothing else, Michele, through this book, I've learned that you are a persevering kind of individual, because
Yes.
I think it would be fair to say that you hit closed door after closed door, difficulty after difficulty, and you push through those. And the first is that here you are at Georgetown, getting your degree, I think it was in Arab Studies, if I remember right.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And it was a graduate program, and I understand exactly what you went through in terms of that. In terms of both of us had to pass the language, right?
Yes.
And I failed mine the first time. I'm sure you did much better than I did, because you'd actually been to Egypt. But nevertheless, okay, we go through all of that, and you say, well, maybe I'm interested in the CIA. You really are going to work in the intelligence side, not the operations side. And then you get a letter. Tell us the rest of the story.
Yes. So I was really shocked when I had originally gotten the call back from the CIA recruiter saying, we're interested in you for this analyst position. And I thought, geez, I don't think I'm CIA material, but well, okay, I'll go with this. So I went through that entire process, which, as you know, is very difficult to get into the agency. The polygraphs, the background investigations, all of the exams. And then after I went through all that, I was very close to starting this new job that I thought would be the career for the rest of my life. And then I got a rejection letter in the mail. And I was like, what just happened? The CIA said, you no longer meet the requirements for this job as an analyst. We're withdrawing it from you, with no further explanation.
Yeah. Well, spoiler alert, let's jump ahead a little bit, because it wasn't until I read deeper into your book a while back that I realized that was just a form letter. You know,
Yes.
you were crushed by that.
So
Like,
crushed.
how in the world did I not meet the requirements? And then it turns out that actually they had just overhired. And again, I understand that. Having lived in Washington, D.C., having friends there, knowing government agencies, including knowing a few people that used to go to my church that were CIA, sometimes they'll hire this many because they recognize that some will wash out and then I'll have the part I need. And
Right.
if people don't wash out and you're further down on the list, guess what?
Guess what?
You're left holding the bag.
Exactly.
So get us to then the CIA, because then a little bit later you had a friend come by and you didn't even like to hear the letters CIA, but nevertheless you persevered. So tell that story.
I was a little bit bitter because I really didn't understand what had happened. And Joseph and I had dinner with a friend, and he said, hey, guys, there's this other side of the CIA, and quote, that's the really cool side.
Yeah.
It's the guys that do the operations in the field, and I think we should all be doing that. And so I wasn't allowed to reapply to the CIA for a full year. So I told my husband, if this interests you, knock yourself out. But I don't think I can still get hired because I still don't know what I did to jeopardize this last job.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's so important for people to understand that life is full of rejections and difficulties
Yes.
and uncertainties. But you have to remember that often the rejections are there to get you off the wrong path and onto the right path.
Right. Yeah.
Because I later learned, had I gotten in as an analyst into the CIA, I could have never been on the operations side. I could have
Right.
never switched over. And so my career ended up being completely different. Here I am, all ready to go, 9/11. And now you understand, like, everything in your life makes sense at that point in time. And so obviously God knew what I did not, which is that I needed to be in on the other side, and my husband and I need to be at what they call the point of the spear,
Right.
doing operations in the field.
Yeah, and operations is different than the analyst. You know,
Right.
some people watching a Tom Clancy a movie or a book think, well, they run from being a desk job to go out there and shooting. That doesn't happen very often.
It doesn't happen very often at all. In fact, they try to prevent that from happening in the agency.
That's right.
Yeah.
So you thought you'd be kind of behind a desk and using your Arabic studies and those kinds of things, and instead you're out there in the field
Yes.
with Joseph, right?
Yes,
and that's your
indeed.
husband. I haven't really introduced him yet. Talk about how you met together. That's an important part of the story, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's really critical because Joseph was born in Beirut and grew up most of his life in Egypt as a Christian, and his parents had a pretty significant Christian ministry in Upper Egypt. And what's interesting about that is they come from a place where the foundations of Al-Qaeda's ideology come from.
Yes.
So there's a significant tension between Christians and Muslims in that area, and a lot of persecution of Christians. So he ended up having to come to the United States in order to get his education because he was denied an education in Egypt for his Christian activities. And so that church that brought him to the United States, the pastor's son was my classmate. And
Yes.
so funny thing, we met in Central Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, it's an incredible story. We need to take a break, but let me just mention that, first of all, we have the book, Breaking Cover. Now, it has been out for some time, so you should be able to find it in your local bookstore. It's published by Tyndale, about 200 pages, and I've got here, I'll just hold it up for those of you watching online, the hardback cover of that, and it's published by Tyndale, and it's entitled Breaking Cover, My Secret Life in the CIA and What It Taught Me About What's Worth Fighting For. If you can't find it in your bookstore, we have a link to your website, also an online link in case people want to order it or even get the Kindle version or all that. That's all available at our website, pointofview.net. And before we're over too much longer, I also want to talk about the fact that you are giving a message tonight. It's part of the Critical Conversations. It's hosted by the Hope Center, and I would certainly want to encourage you to attend. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about how to do so. We have some links on the website, but we'll also make it easy for you to sign up to attend if you'd like to do so. But we need to take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Earlier this month, the Supreme Court struck down the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act that barred state-authorized sports gambling with some exceptions. New Jersey plans to join Nevada as another state that will allow legal sports betting. Other states like Delaware, New York, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia will probably follow. I wondered how long it would be before the professional sports associations would react to the decision. We didn't have to wait for long. The NFL said that it had a long-standing and unwavering commitment to protecting the integrity of the game. They called on Congress to get involved because of the potential harm posed by sports betting and the concern this could erode the public confidence in these events. In my chapter on gambling, in Christian Ethics in Plain Language, I explained the potential problem. Gamblers bet on the point spread. Suppose a team was picked to win by more than 3 points and was leading by 1 point with less than a minute left. Even if the team was on its opponent's 20-yard line, the coach might decide not to kick a field goal. For doing so might risk the possibility of a block kick. Can you imagine the fans and gamblers who would want to call for an investigation? In my book, I acknowledge that the Bible does not directly address gambling, but there are numerous biblical principles that can be applied. Gambling can breed a form of covetousness and is often a destroyer of the work ethic. Gambling often corrupts values of hard work and thrift, replacing them with dependence on luck and chance. Gambling can be a family-destroying addiction. Many gamblers fall prey to the gambler's fallacy by believing that a string of losses makes the next win more likely. In fact, some have called gambling just another mind-altering drug. Unfortunately, it looks like sports gambling will spread to a number of states, joining the many other forms of state-sponsored gambling. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In studio with us today, Michele Rigby Assad. By the way, if you'd like to join a comment or make a comment or you can make a phone call, 1-800-351-1212. The book is entitled Breaking Cover, My Secret Life in the CIA and What It Taught Me About What's Worth Fighting For. As I mentioned, she will be speaking tonight at the Critical Conversations event hosted by the Hope Center. And if you'd like to know a little bit more, a couple of ideas. Number one, you can go directly to thehopecenter.org/critical conversations. But I thought I'd also make it easy, since right now we aren't getting a lot of phone calls. Let me just suggest that if any of you would want to get some of that information off air, you can call Steve, our producer, and that number is 1-800-351-1212, and we can begin to give you some more information about that. And so there'll be a chance for people to meet you and hear you talk about not only the book, but all sorts of things you've been doing since then. True?
Yes.
Yes, so again, part of the Critical Conversations event taking place tonight here at the Hope Center, which is in Plano. Let's get back to becoming a CIA agent, because now you had to go through everything again. And this is where I started realizing every time we turned around, you're dealing with another challenge. It's a challenge of, did I answer the questions well enough on the various forms? When they were doing a lie detector test, did I answer and not cause the needle to jump? When we did the ambush training, did I success? And from time after time, there were times when you talk about in the book, you were convinced that you just weren't going to make it, but you always did. You persevered, didn't you?
I always tell people what I lack in natural talent, I make up for in perseverance. And that often I succeed because I just hang in there longer than other people do. But there are so many things. I mean, it's not like you have some threshold for, can I be an agent? Can I be an undercover CIA officer?
Yeah.
What do you compare that to in your life?
Yes.
And so you walk into that not having any idea if you're capable of identifying surveillance, debriefing a source, running a secure and safe operation and not getting yourself or someone else killed.
Right.
And these are really big
issues.
matters.
Yeah.
And so I dealt with a lot of intimidation in that process, but I just kept saying, okay, Michelle, just put one foot in front of the other and just focus on this thing in front of your face, get through it. And that's usually how I succeeded.
If we go back to your family background, though, you had some strengths that you only sort of discovered, and that is when they described what a CIA agent needed to do, you began to realize that here I have, in your case, a lot of empathy. I'm really good at reading body language. Even when I was a young child, in school and even in our home, I understood some of that, and those were qualities that helped you succeed as a CIA agent, didn't it?
Yeah, they did. And the funny thing was, growing up, I didn't realize those were skills.
Yes.
It was who I was.
Yeah, just natural.
And
yeah.
I had absolutely no idea that those particular skill sets could be useful or helpful in a job. And it turns out that they're what made me a really good intelligence officer. But it's what you might classify as soft skills.
Yes.
It's not hard skills like I can create computer software, but the ability to walk in and size somebody up so quickly and to really understand their motivations and what makes them tick. Unless you fundamentally get other people, you really can't be a good intelligence officer.
Anybody that picks up your book will see in the cover where it says, and the flyleaf, when debriefing energy hardest, most agents have 3 handicaps. We're Americans, strike 1. We're non-believers, strike 2. And CIA officers, strike 3. As I prepared myself to walk in and meet Abu Muhammad for the first time, I knew I had a 4th handicap. I was a woman. Now, as I read your book, though, you pointed out just the opposite, because this is one of the strengths that you women in the CIA or other circumstances have. People underestimate you.
Yes.
And you used that to your advantage, didn't you?
Yeah, I figured it out. I realized at some point, I can't help what somebody thinks about when I walk in the door, but I have a really good chance of getting them to formulate a different opinion about me before they leave.
Yes.
And so I decided, hey, fine, underestimate me, but I'm going to fight for respect. And I was very good at securing respect with terrorists and insurgents who looked like they had nothing in common with me. Yeah, and it's a fascinating process because what enabled me to do that was that I had spent so much of my time trying to understand the Middle East. So I tell people you have to be an expert in order to make that work for you.
Right. Well, and again, you went to an unnamed country and then later to Iraq. And I love how you just got this blank, bold section, redaction. But talk about what you can. I recognize there are obviously some limitations of going to these 2 different countries, one named and one unnamed. But there are some skills, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, that you use later on to rescue various Syrian Christians. But talk about some of the things you and Joseph learned when you go to those countries.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because you go to these places, you feel like you're literally on the edge of the earth. You know that you're a target, and you know that you're surrounded by Al-Qaeda. They're running around the city because you're in the CIA, so you know this.
Yes.
And so you're sharing the streets with really bad guys. And it was so fascinating because it really taught us how to carry out complex operations in difficult places. And again, like you alluded to, and as is in the book, we were able later to use those skills to do something on the outside of the CIA in a very unique place, helping persecuted Iraqi Christians. But all those years in the CIA, all those times of serving in war zones and difficult places, learning how to deal with really bad guys, kind of built up this really interesting skill set that we thought we might not be able to use outside of the CIA.
One of the things I might just suggest is people do a Google search and type in Michele Rigby Assad or any variation and then hit images. And you're going to see 2 different kinds of images. Some where you're dressed like a fashion model, like a Bond girl, if you will, and others where you obviously are a real bad kind of individual that's in that particular area. And you really had to live live almost in two different kinds of worlds, didn't you? Especially when you end up in a place where Al-Qaeda is around and could be walking past you on the street. You have to be kind of a bad girl sometimes, don't you?
You have to really learn how to watch out for yourself. You have to look at everything, because when you're living in places like that, like one was a kidnapping and carjacking capital of the world, you had to be aware of your surroundings at all times. So I'm Smiley. You know, I was that homecoming queen growing up, and I'm a friendly person because I love people.
Right.
But what people don't often understand is you can be really tough. And I had to be really tough in these places because it really was a matter of life and death. And so I think I learned in the Middle East how to stand up for myself and how to show my determination, kind of wear it more clearly than I necessarily would like in the South.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that I thought was interesting in the book because, you know, you are just kind of a people pleaser. A lot of us tend to be that way. Growing up in the South, you're very nice. But you come back from an assignment, you're going to get weapons training for Iraq. Yeah. And all of a sudden, you're a particular person who's supposed to handle all of your details. Said, well, I don't want to talk to either of the Assads because I've had a really bad day. Traffic was bad. And you finally crack it. So you think you've had a bad day. And you go through all the things you had to deal with. And everybody was like, it was one of those E.F. Hutton commercials where everybody just stops and nobody moves because this is the first time they've seen Michele Rigby Assad really assert herself in the middle of the CIA, right?
Anyone who's worked with a bureaucracy understands that moment where that person who's supposed to process you to go out to the war zone of all places is saying, like, I don't have time for you because I had a really bad commute this morning. And I had just, I'd had too many things happen. I had just been...
you almost were you were in the hospital at one point.
Yes, I went into anaphylactic shock before I left the country.
I won't even go into all the details.
Yeah, there's a lot of details, but I was like basically scared about dying, and then she had a bad commute.
She had a bad day.
And so I basically had one of those moments where my like inner Hulk came out, and I was like, well, you've had a bad day.
You have no idea what a bad day is like, especially if you spend your time in the Middle East and you also have health challenges like no one else in the room can understand.
Yeah.
So, if anything else, just why it's such a fascinating book. When we come back, though, and say, okay, you leave the CIA, what next? And what turns out is an opportunity for you to save Syrian Christians. And we've talked about this before. Tom Doyle, by the way, is going to moderate to some of the things you're going to be doing tonight. Tom's been here. We've had Joel Rosenberg. We've had all sorts of individuals talking about what has been happening in the Middle East. Johnny Moore is another one that we can mention. And so when we come back, we're going to talk about how God used Michele Rigby Assad's training, as well as Joseph's training, to really help rescue some of these Christians. So it's a fascinating story. It's another part of the book, and we'll spend some time talking about that. If you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. If you don't want to get on the air, but you'd like to know more about the Critical Conversations event tonight, you can use that number. And, of course, we've already mentioned that you can go to the Hope Center or, again, thehopecenter.org/critical conversations. I think we also have a link on the website. Either way, that will help you find out a little bit more. And if you'd like to meet her tonight, hear her speak, or hear the rest of her story, or get a copy of her book and get her to sign it, all of that's available at the Hope Center tonight. We need to take a break, though. And if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Got a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today. In studio with us, Michele Rigby Assad. You can certainly watch online. First of all, we have, of course, our streaming video, and you can, of course, listen, but also on our YouTube channel, as well as on Facebook Live. You'll find some opportunities to watch this as well. But just before we get any further, Michele, let me talk about, first of all, your website, because as people go to the picture of you, that website will take them to micheleRigbyAssad.com. They don't have to write it out. We've got the link there. But when they go there, they can get a copy of the book. But you also have posted a lot of resources. One is the blog. We have a new CIA director, and I see you've written a blog about that. Tell us more.
Yes, I have. So, of course, everyone wants to know, what's your opinion of the new director, and are you excited that it's a woman?
Yes.
And, of course, I am excited. I think it's good symbolically that it's showing a little bit of diversity, but really the what I was trying to address in this blog piece are the things that no one else is talking about. So there's been a real single issue focus in the debate over the last several months. And really the CIA is facing far more difficult issues that need to be addressed. And so that letter that I wrote to her, it's an open letter. I'm trying to encourage her to really focus on her best resources, her people.
Yes. And again, change management focus. Don't wall yourself off from the workforce. Look creatively at the CIA's hiring practices. Develop better platforms to get closer to our targets. Initiate and institute a meaningful leadership training program, and on and on and on. So, again, Gina Haspel's been in the news, and so that is available on our website. Yes. If people scroll down, they'll find information about the book, and if they scroll a little bit further, they'll find a link to the Critical Conversations event that is taking place tonight. And so I would encourage people, if they would like to attend, we've made it very easy for them just simply to follow some of the links that are there so that they can sign up. Or, of course, if they don't have access right now to a computer, they can just give us a call, 800-351-1212. We'll have Steve pass on some of that information for them as well. So those resources are all available at our website, which is pointofview.net. And let's now move from the CIA to not being in the CIA. I love how you start that one chapter. It's kind of like, up until now, the government's told us where we're going to go, what we're going to do, how we're going to be trained, and all that. All of a sudden, it's you and Joseph trying to figure out what the next steps are.
Yeah, which is very scary because you have now spent 10 years in the agency. You have no resume. You can't tell people what you've done. You have no Rolodex of contacts to help you get on your feet. And so leaving the CIA is a very intimidating prospect.
I would imagine, yeah.
And then also, in addition to the idea of, like, how are we ever going to get work, and what are we really, what can we do in the civilian workplace, which you really don't have any idea. We were wondering if we could ever feel a sense of purpose again, because we become adrenaline junkies.
Yes.
And
it just could get real boring.
Yes. And we were doing something meaningful literally every hour of the day. And in the sense of, saving lives, dealing with counterterrorism information. But it was really fascinating because we were introduced to a group of people who wanted to help persecuted Syrian and Iraqi Christians.
Right.
And they said, we really need somebody in this process who understands how to carry out complex operations in difficult places.
And you went ding, 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 ding. Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
And by the way, I might just say before we get to that, one of the things that's so hilarious in this book is this argument that some individuals, when they find out you were with the CIA, think that you have superpowers.
Yes, indeed. They think you can do all kinds of things.
Yeah, and that you have all sorts of CIA connections, and they expected more from you than you could possibly, that any human being could possibly deliver. Is that right?
Yes, yes. And there's this perception that you never can quit the CIA, so you must still be undercover, which is obviously not the case. But so it was just so fascinating to see, like, here we were, how do we help these Christians who are saying we cannot go back to our ancient villages that we were displaced from by ISIS? And we really need a place of refuge. And so here we had the skills to know how to vet people and information. Are these people who they say they are?
Yes.
Are there any ISIS infiltrators amongst them who could pose a threat to the receiving country? And then how do you get these people, how do you find a country willing to take them at a point in time when they're just overrun by refugees from every direction? And so that was a tall order. And it miraculously, in 4.5 months, we were able to find one country that said yes. And on December 10th of 2015, we successfully airlifted 149 Iraqi Christians out of Erbil, Kurdistan, to their new homes in Slovakia.
That's amazing. And when you think about this, you had, first of all, the question of where that country might be.
Yes.
Wasn't it Joseph reading in a newspaper or something, if I remember right, that all of a sudden he says, Michelle, guess what? Slovakia is saying they're willing to take Christians.
Yes.
Tell us that story.
We were just sitting, drinking our coffee one morning, reading the Washington Post and New York Times, and my husband said, Michelle, there's a very interesting article. It says Slovakia wants to take persecuted Christians from Syria or Iraq, and but they don't know, they haven't really done much with this project yet. Bingo, this is where we need to go. But we need to find someone who gets us in at the presidential prime minister or minister of interior level, because we knew that it was going to be a very senior decision that had to be made to accept these refugees or, displaced people. And we did. We made one phone call and we're connected with the right people immediately. And so what I think is so fun in the book is to really kind of map out this incredibly miraculous project, one where you're in the right place at the right time. Right. But then to see the hand of God move, to see it move in such a clear and unadulterated fashion really was inspirational to all of us involved in that project.
Especially for somebody that, like you, occasionally had some closed doors, and to see all these doors open on their own,
flying right open. You're like, what is going
Lord,
on?
is such accuracy necessary? I expected I was going to have to crawl over at least a few hurdles here in order to get there. And they
there
opened.
were interesting hurdles.
Yes.
Now that you mention it,
Let's talk about that. Oh, talk about those hurdles, because those are important too.
Two of the biggest hurdles, well, there were so many, but when we were trying to get into Iraq to effect this evacuation, Russia decided to send cruise missiles from the Baltic Sea across Iraqi airspace into Syria against ISIS targets. As a result, Iraqi air authorities had to close down Iraqi airspace. So we were unable initially to get into Iraq. And then once we finally did, we finally, the night, hours before we were getting people ready to leave for the airport, they shut down the airport once again for these cruise missiles, and it threw off the entire evacuation.
That's for sure.
And then we're without a plane, and nobody knew when they were going to be able to fly again. And there were all kinds of rumors in Eastern Europe that Slovakia was getting so much pressure about taking refugees that they might say no. They might take this pause as an excuse to just say no to the whole project. So we watched it almost fall apart several times.
Yes.
And that's why it was such a miraculous thing when it actually did occur.
Just before we take a break, talk about another skill that God used in your life, and you actually opened the book with that. And that is you're interviewing these people, and as you're interviewing them, going, don't you know what's going on? Well, what you really were doing is you were asking sometimes what some might have seemed to them dumb questions, but you were trying to ferret out.
Yes.
Are there any ISIS agents? Are there any people undercover Al-Qaeda connected individuals or radicalized Muslims pretending to be Christians?
Right.
So this is one of those skills that you had developed in the CIA, which was absolutely crucial if you were to get these individuals into Slovakia, because they did not want you to bring in individuals that were going to cause problems in the country later on. Fair?
Absolutely not. And what's so fascinating was it had become, for us, people said, that must have been a really difficult thing. Actually, that might have been one of the easiest things we did. We had so much experience vetting people and information, being able to interview someone, look them in the eye, see if they're being, funny about their answers, and being able to look at their documentation and look at their paperwork and be able to vet that paperwork. So that part for us was simple. And what's fascinating in the book is I highlight a case where there was an individual posing as a convert from Islam that we were able to determine was lying the entire time. So whether he was an economic refugee or posing as a Christian, or if he was a really bad guy, it's really hard to tell. Yeah. But he was not the real thing.
Yeah. Well, and there's a funny part in the story here about somebody talking about getting a Harley Davidson, and you're having lots of fun using your skills. Do not lie to Michele Rigby Assad. She will read you in a moment. And we need to take, again, one of those mandatory breaks. When we come back, we'll talk about what's happened since then and how people can use what you have done, because, of course, you are available as a speaker. You're also available to provide consulting in a variety variety of different areas. And so matter of fact, one of the things we're going to be talking about tonight are some of the ministries there in the Hope Center, which actually have an outreach to the Muslim world. And I know that that is something that you and I share as a concern and a desire to address as well. But we need to take a break. And if you find yourself saying, oh, I've got to read the book, and you do need to read the book, it's entitled Breaking Cover, My Secret Life in the CIA and What It Taught Me About What's Worth Fighting For. It is published by Tyndale. Over 200 pages. I've got in my hands here the hardback version, but of course you can also find out about getting a Kindle and some other resources as well. We have a link to Michele's website, and we also have a link to the Hope Center, so in case you'd like to attend the critical conversations, all available right there at our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk for just a few more minutes about her future, what she and Joseph are doing, and how you might want to use them as well. Lots of stories left. We'll try to talk about those quickly right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The United States Army is known for its uniform appearance, and you've probably seen pictures of new recruits sporting a clean-shaven look. Recently, the Secretary of the Army announced new religious accommodation guidelines. Brigade-level commanders may now grant religious accommodations to servicemen and women who wear beards, turbans, or hijabs for religious reasons. Sikhs are expected to see the most immediate benefit. For years, Sikhs have litigated orders to remove their religiously required beards and turbans. The new guidelines should solve much of the unnecessary restrictions previously placed upon those freely exercising their religion by means of grooming requirements. Retired Army Chief Chaplain and Southern Baptist minister Douglas Carver sees benefit to the Army's broad protection for the religion of soldiers. According to Carver, soldiers are prepared to go to battle and, if need be, die. For soldiers, it is the practice of religion that most often brings courage and calmness. It's hard to imagine a finer force that protects religious liberty and all liberty on the planet than the United States military. As our service members work to protect our liberty, we ought to do what we can to preserve their religious liberty in service to our country. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Okay, for a few more minutes today, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Of course, next hour you can call as well. I just mentioned that we have Senator Ted Cruz coming on with us, as well as Lieutenant Governor Kevin Bryant, who's now running for the governorship of the state of South Carolina. So we've got a lot of things to cover. Also be getting into a couple of other issues in the news that we'll be talking about, including Starbucks and the issue of racism and, just a variety of other things that we'll get into. So we will cover those in the next hour. But just before we run out of time, Michele, let's, if we can, talk about the rest of the story. You were able to get those individuals from the Kurdistan area of northern Iraq into Slovakia. What's the rest of the story?
Well, the rest of the story is that really the story is just starting for those people. I try to explain how difficult it is to integrate into a new society and a new culture. Imagine if you were just dropped into Tokyo and suddenly had to get a job in Japanese or go to university in Japanese. So there was a lot of struggle that they're dealing with, but bless their hearts. We've got reports because Joseph has stayed very close contact with them. Several of the young people are in university. Mm-hmm. Several have really good jobs and are working. So they're making their way, but a few actually did try to return to Iraq when Mosul was taken back from ISIS, right. And a lot of their ancient villages were liberated as well. The problem is ISIS left such a mess behind. They really just destroyed the infrastructure. And so even people who thought, I'm willing to live in rubble, realize how very difficult it's going to be to rebuild these societies. So, and I think, but one of the positive aspects of this, I think Americans more than ever understand that Christians do exist in the Middle East, because for a long period of time they didn't even realize that, and that they need our support. And so every time people says, what can we do? I said, it's so great to create partnerships between the Western church and a church in Egypt or Iraq or Syria, where you're helping each other, you're doing cultural exchanges and things like that. You're praying for each other, you're lifting each other up, and, sometimes helping with your money as well.
Yes. Well, again, there's always been a Christian presence in the Nineveh plain for all these centuries. And now to have ISIS basically shoo them out and push them out and, of course, mark them and all of the rest. And, of course, we've raised funds here at Point of View to actually help those who are ministering in the refugee camps.
Thank you, by the way, for doing that. That's so critical.
And some of them, like I said, are hoping that they could be able to go back. Not all of them want to go to the United States or go to Slovakia or wherever that might be. They would like to return to their ancient lands, but it is, again, just one of those ongoing challenges that is faced. Yes. So talk about for just a minute what you and Joseph are available to do, because obviously, first of all, I think, as we have already alluded to, you're a speaker tonight, but you'd be available to speak in other venues, but also you do consulting, a number of things. So talk about the range of resources available through you.
Yes. So Joseph and I run a consulting firm, and we do everything from providing risk assessments to oil companies doing work in the Middle East and expanding into new oil fields. So we can tell them, whether what's going on the ground. Is ISIS a threat? Is any kind of ideology or what's going on in that area a potential threat to facilities or people? We've been asked to try to help rescue people, such as the Iraqi Christians, people who are trapped in places and need help getting out. And also, I just love using this really unique platform to inspire others. So I love speaking to university groups, churches, community groups. I've been all over the place, State Department, Google. So I love getting out there and showing how important diversity is in the workforce, and how important it is, how important your faith is to perseverance in life. Yeah. And also just reminding people that the most difficult paths are the most interesting ones.
Yes. That's very good. And it seems to me that if a church was doing a mission outreach on the Middle East, you could actually provide some expertise and perspective on that people would not normally have, because you have access to some of the resources that even some of the indigenous missionaries might not have.
Right. And so we're very interesting in this way that we combine humanitarian experience and passions with intelligence work. And so we're able to train people for the mission field. We're able to train people who are going to live abroad. We provide training to students who are studying abroad for a semester. So we go into universities and do that kind of thing. So we're merging two worlds that don't usually get merged together.
Again, so what will people find when they land on your website? Because we've mentioned it once, but again, you've got a blog, you've got a connection for speaking. If people wanted to contact you in one way or another, they have a contact form to fill out, right?
Indeed, yes. People can ask me questions, make comments, tell me their impressions of the book. And also that blog is really meant to bring the Middle East to everyone. In other words, I didn't write it for the think tank folks. I wrote it for normal Americans. How, Michelle, can I understand Iraq better? How can I understand what's going on in Syria better? Or simple questions like, how do I know when I'm on the right path? And how do I know God's will for my life? So I write about a variety of topics, but really try to make them accessible to everyone.
As you go to the website, let me just mention there's a couple of videos. One of those is an interview you did with Megyn Kelly.
Yes.
And it's about 5 minutes long, so people could actually click that share button and put it on their Facebook page and start a conversation.
Yes.
And if you wanted to, the ABC 2020 special is 52 minutes long, I might mention, and so you can watch the whole story.
It's incredible to have a whole camera crew with you when you're doing a major evacuation and to capture all of the drama of this event. And so, yeah, that people, if you want to see what we did in Iraq with that project, it's right there on the website.
So again, I just think that there's some great resources on your website, and the book itself is one that you could certainly hand to a variety of individuals. If nothing else, you know, your Christianity is latent here, but it's not overdone. But at the same time, I think I could hand this to individuals saying, you know, you've been reading a Tom Clancy novel here. I want to tell you one that actually happened.
Yes.
And you'd really enjoy reading that. I think it'd just be a real conversation starter, don't you think?
It is. It's amazing what the CIA let me talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And so
I'm
really
amazed.
gives you,
Yeah.
I know, right? It gives you such a really good window into what life is really like, what it's really like to debrief a bad guy and try to get intelligence out of him, that the psychology of espionage, the psychology of dealing with people that are so different from you. And so it's not one of those books that's like, about complex operations in Afghanistan post 9/11. It's like the everyday life of a counterterrorism officer that I tried to expose the world to, but not in order to lift myself up, but to give people courage to do the things that scare them.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't anything that I did in the CIA or the Middle East that I felt fully prepared for, but I did it anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm just a normal person. So the idea is to show how normal people can do really extraordinary things when their faith is greater than their fear.
Well, again, she will be speaking tonight, and as I mentioned before, you can go to thehopecenter.org/critical conversations. Of course, we've given you an opportunity to call our number, 800-351-1212. We'll pass it on, and she'll be speaking tonight. You'll also have a chance to hear about some of the other ministries at the Hope Center that actually have an outreach to the Middle East, and we appreciate you flying in to obviously speak at that Hope Center event, but I'm glad you flew in early enough that you could be on the program with us today.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we have a lot to cover because there are some really important issues here. One of the questions that people have said is, okay, if Starbucks was concerned about racism, why is it that they fund Planned Parenthood? So we're going to be talking about that. Also, as I mentioned, we have a couple of individuals that are either in office or running for office. Kevin Bryant is a lieutenant governor in South Carolina, will be running for the governorship, and Ted Cruz is running for re-election in the U.S. Senate. So we'll be talking with them as well. Got lots of things to cover. And I also noticed that Dinesh D'Souza, they're talking about whether or not the president is going to actually commute his sentence and actually pardon him as well. So we'll see where that all goes. So we have a lot to cover. We will do that. And all of those articles that we'll be talking about today are available on the website, pointofview.net. If you would like to know more about Michele, we have that link. And also, of course, we have a link to the Hope Center. And all of it is available at pointofview.net. We'll be back with more right after this.
Every big story in human history began with one person. Point of View Radio has sparked many stories during the past 5 decades.
I'm 25 years old, and I've been listening to Point of View for about 12 years now.
I can't say enough about how it's touched my life and changed me completely.
The effect was incredible, and it was immediate.
I mean, I've seen Congress turn around.
There was a transformation that really did take place.
Oh, you missed your cue. This is where your story belongs. How has Point of View made a difference in your life and your community? We want to hear your story, and when you share it, you'll automatically be entered in a drawing for an iPad mini, and if we share your story to inspire others, we'll send you a Bible stick, an audio New Testament that you can take anywhere. So tell us your story before June 1st, at pointofview.net/story or call 1-855-335-2100. You could win an iPad mini, and your story may encourage someone else to make a difference. 855-335-2100 and pointofview.net/story. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We've got lots to cover in the next couple of hours. Donald Trump has said that he will pardon conservative pundit Dinesh D'Souza. I've also heard of some others that he may be pardoning as well, so we'll talk about that in just a minute. I think this may be the first time I say the name Kim Kardashian on Point of View, but she was actually with the president yesterday talking about prison reform. There have been some people that have been critical of that action, but I wanted to tell you at least the backstory there. Of course, this week we've been following the whole issue of racism, haven't we? First of all, of course, it was the Starbucks decision that on May 29th, that it would actually deal with the issue of unconscious bias and the issue of racism. Well, one of the articles I've posted by our friend John Smirek is, well, if indeed Starbucks is serious about racism, why is it sending money to the racist Planned Parenthood, is his argument. And then there have been a number of statements being made over the last couple of days as to whether or not the media itself is actually creating a culture, if you will, a Columbine culture, by reporting so much about school shootings that it actually encourages other shooters to follow suit. And so we'll get into that a little bit. And David Clark's talked about this issue as well, about the need to target criminal behavior, the need to target those individuals most inclined to actually act out. And before we're all through with the next 2 hours, we'll also have a chance to talk with Senator Ted Cruz. Governor Greg Abbott in the state of Texas convened a gathering of state and local leaders to really begin to say, how can we make our schools safer? Ted Cruz is going to talk about some of the recommendations that the governor has put forward, which apply not only to the state of Texas, but to all of you that are listening. So we'll get a chance to talk with Ted Cruz, and we'll have all sorts of other topics we're going to put on the table as well. Look at the governor's race in South Carolina a little bit later. So it's got a lot to cover. So certainly let me encourage you to listen in and then join in if you'd like to join us. That number is 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to leave a comment, as we so often say, we not only, of course, broadcast on our website, but it's also available on Facebook Live. You can leave a post there, and we'll certainly react to it as well. Let me take this issue real quickly of Dinesh D'Souza. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but Dinesh D'Souza, a good friend, he's been on this program with us before. He's done a number of films, and as you may know, was convicted of a campaign finance violation. In the past, when somebody is convicted of a violation of campaign finance, it's usually a fine. It is rarely, as it was in the case of him, a time in which you have to go to prison. Now, again, it wasn't like hard time, but still there was, I think, a tremendous overreaction. What was he guilty of? Well, he pled guilty to this: reimbursing two of his associates after directing them to contribute $10,000 each to a Senate campaign of Wendy Long. So in some respects, he wasn't necessarily violating the campaign finance laws directly, but he was indirectly. And so as a result, he was convicted. And Donald Trump has said that he believes that Dinesh D'Souza was unfairly treated by the government. So it looks like he is indeed going to pardon Dinesh D'Souza. So I thought I would mention that. Now, there is a suggestion that there are a variety of other individuals that will actually be pardoned as well. So we'll see how long that list grows, and we'll probably talk about that tomorrow here on Point of View on our weekend edition. But just before we take a break, let me talk about Kim Kardashian West, and that is she met with the president yesterday to talk about prison reform. That, of course, created all sorts of hue and cry about what is she doing there. And in particular, CNN reporter Jim Acosta said that she shouldn't be here talking about prison reform. It's nice that she is here, but it's not a serious thing to have happened here in the White House. He was saying it's not normal. Of course, some people like to point out the hypocrisy of the fact that they point out and even show a particular interview that Jim Acosta did with the singer John Legend during President Obama's administration talking about prison reform. But okay, I'll treat that differently. Talking with the president is a little different. But I thought I would at least educate some of you that are younger listeners to recognize that this whole phenomenon started back in the 1990s. There was a time in which there were actually gathering of those in the House. I guess it was in the Senate. No, that time I guess it was in the House of Representatives, where they gathered together a number of individuals, Jessica Lange, Sissy Spacek, and Jane Fonda. And they were all testifying on farm policy. Now, you might say, well, why is that? Well, it turns out that Jessica Lange had just been in a film called Country, which was all about farms. You also had Sissy Spacek, who starred in The River. And at least to give her credit, she actually lives on a farm. And then, of course, Jane Fonda, who I don't think lives on a farm, nevertheless had a title role in The Doll Maker, and that was about family farms. And so this kind of silliness of allowing celebrities to address Congress about serious issues has been going on for some time. But just in case you are wondering, why is it that Kim Kardashian's even taking this issue on? Well, it has to do with the story of Alice Marie Johnson, who is a 63-year-old great-grandmother. She's serving a current life sentence for a nonviolent drug-related crime. Now, she was convicted back in 1996 on 8 criminal counts related to cocaine trafficking. At that time, she was involved, if I remember right, in kind of the communications. She wasn't one of the kingpins. She was one of the people that was working out communications for trafficking and that kind of thing. So as a result, she spent basically 2 decades worth of time behind bars. So it's almost, I guess it's really 21 years, not 24 yet, but still that's a tremendous amount of time that she spent there as well. And so as a result, there are people saying it's time for her to perhaps be pardoned as well. But more importantly, just a desire to recognize that she was not involved in a violent crime. When you have a person serving a life sentence, usually it's because they've killed someone. She was involved in drug trafficking, but she essentially received the same penalty, the same sentence as the kingpins. And if you go back and look at her backstory, it's a really sad story. She lost her job at FedEx there in Memphis, where she'd worked for 10 years due to her gambling addiction. Then she got divorced. Then her youngest child died in a motorcycle accident. So it's a pretty sad story to mention it. But if nothing else, she gradually got involved in drug trafficking, but she never brokered any deals. She never handled any drugs. But she was responsible for some of the coded messages that took place on the phone. And even though this arrest was her first offense, she received a life sentence. So I want to come back and talk about that just for another minute or two, but I'd love to get your comments about this because we're going to be hearing more and more about this issue of prison reform, criminal justice reform. And here is, I think, one individual who I suspect might also be pardoned by Donald Trump. By the way, in case you're wondering, she's African-American. Of course, we just mentioned a minute ago, Dinesh D'Souza. It's a person of color coming from India. It's always interesting. People say he's racist. Well, he certainly actually lately pardoned a lot of individuals of color. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Earlier this month, the Supreme Court struck down the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act that barred state-authorized sports gambling with some exceptions. New Jersey plans to join Nevada as another state that will allow legal sports betting. Other states like Delaware, New York, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia will probably follow. I wondered how long it would be before the professional sports associations would react to the decision. We didn't have to wait for long. The NFL said that it had a long-standing and unwavering commitment to protecting the integrity of the game. They called on Congress to get involved because of the potential harm posed by sports betting and the concern this could erode the public confidence in these events. In my chapter on gambling, in Christian Ethics in Plain Language, I explained the potential problem. Gamblers bet on the point spread. Suppose a team was picked to win by more than 3 points and was leading by 1 point with less than a minute left. Even if the team was on its opponent's 20-yard line, the coach might decide not to kick a field goal. For doing so might risk the possibility of a block kick. Can you imagine the fans and gamblers who would want to call for an investigation? In my book, I acknowledge that the Bible does not directly address gambling, but there are numerous biblical principles that can be applied. Gambling can breed a form of covetousness and is often a destroyer of the work ethic. Gambling often corrupts values of hard work and thrift, replacing them with dependence on luck and chance. Gambling can be a family-destroying addiction. Many gamblers fall prey to the gambler's fallacy by believing that a string of losses makes the next win more likely. In fact, some have called gambling just another mind-altering drug. Unfortunately, it looks like sports gambling will spread to a number of states, joining the many other forms of state-sponsored gambling. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Kim Kardashian West in front of the president yesterday. And again, I'd love to get your comments. Is there a place for celebrities? Sometimes they have access to individuals of power or politicians that the rest of us don't have. And as I pointed out, if you go back a couple of decades, you have Jessica Lange, and you have Sissy Spacek, and you also have a couple of other individuals like Jane Fonda giving testimony on farm policy. Well, again, that's where that all started, and it's still continuing, although I don't know that Kim Kardashian was really doing anything more than trying to make a case for this particular individual, Alice Marie Johnson, who, as I pointed out before, was convicted on 8 criminal counts of cocaine trafficking back in 1996, been in prison for 21 years, going on 22 years, and an individual who has a life sentence when it's very obvious that she was not actually involved in handling the drugs. She was not brokering any deals for the drugs. She was responsible basically for relaying some of the coded messages over the phone. And she, of course, had a very tragic life of losing her job at FedEx, a gambling addiction, divorce. Then her youngest son died in a motorcycle accident. It doesn't give an excuse, but I think it at least helps us understand the circumstances she found herself in. But I'd love to get your comments. Does it warrant a life sentence when this was a first offense, when indeed she did not actually have any connection directly to the drug trafficking, but certainly had connections indirectly? And, of course, Her daughter has said she's made some serious mistakes in her life, but she is not this monster. She's really turned a very negative situation to a positive situation as she can. As I understand, she's actually taken a number of courses. I think she's now an ordained minister, if I remember right. And one of the arguments I think we're going to have to be making over the next couple of months as we see this debate taking place about prison reform is how, in some respects, only these faith-based organizations are going to bring about the kind of change. Putting a person in prison without doing anything to, quote, rehabilitate them, I think just guarantees that now they will leave prison with a prison record and have even less of a chance to be able to get meaningful work. And so in some respects, prison is not a place where we rehabilitate them. It's sometimes a place where they actually learn various kinds of criminal activities, actually develop relations with other criminals, and actually go back to a life of crime. If there's one place where I think we have seen a success in terms of rehabilitation, it's come with these faith-based organizations. And we've talked about this so often here on Point of View, whether it's Bill Glass, whether it's Prison Fellowship, whether it's some of the ministries and chaplains that we've talked about here, whether it's the fact that in some of these individuals now they can actually get Bible college degrees, they can get seminary degrees. I really do believe the gospel is the ultimate answer. But as we get talking about prison reform, one of the things that was brought front and center by, again, Kim Kardashian West was the plight of Alice Marie Johnson. Love to get your comments if you have any. 1-800-351-1212. Let's come back to one of the topics we've been addressing this week, and that has to do with Starbucks. Now, John Smirek has written a very good piece. We've posted it on our website, pointofview.net, and he talks about, again, the story. And if you're not familiar, Starbucks manager evicted 2 non-customers because they were African American and because they found themselves being arrested. Starbucks took the unprecedented act of Tuesday, May 29th, of closing down 8,000 stores, going through a training for 175,000 individuals on the issue of unconscious bias. Now, John Smirek puts it this way. You know what this fracas didn't do? It didn't stop Starbucks from supporting America's most prominent racist group, Planned Parenthood. Thus, the message of an open letter published by civil rights leader Alveda King and other pro-life activists and groups. So let's, if we can, talk about this pro-life letter. Now, Alveda King has been on the program here. She is the daughter of, I guess it'd be the niece of Martin Luther King Jr. and the daughter of, was it Martin Luther King's brother? I believe it was. But nevertheless, the letter says, as men and women who fight for the value and dignity of every human life, Alveda King and some of the others who signed it said, where is the humanity and inclusion when your company matches employees' donations to Planned Parenthood, whose founder, Margaret Sanger, was an outspoken racist with genocidal intentions? This week, she said, Starbucks is holding racial bias education training for nearly 175,000 employees nationwide. If you think this public relations fix means Starbucks is no longer complicit in racism, it's time to wake up and smell your own coffee. Kind of love that turn of light. Let me jump down to near the end of the letter because it's where it gives you some documentation. She says, for example, active with the Ku Klux Klan and the eugenics movement, Margaret Sanger's stated agenda was to eradicate the African American population. Her dream is being realized by the slaughter of minority children today through the horror of abortion. You know, just a minute ago, I mentioned Dinesh D'Souza, and if you saw Dinesh D'Souza's most recent movie, there's a point where he shows Margaret Sanger speaking, and then the camera backs away, and you can see she's speaking in front of a Ku Klux Klan rally. Now, that was a reconfiguration of a historical event, but it's a good reminder of the founder of Planned Parenthood spoke at Klan rallies and actually called for the elimination of those who are African American. Let me go back to Alveda King. She says, with every donation your company gives to Planned Parenthood, the largest single provider of abortions in the United States, performing over 300,000 per year, Starbucks is contributing to one of the most racist organizations in our nation's history. Abortion mills like Planned Parenthood didn't become prevalent in the lives of pregnant African-American women for happenstance. Planned Parenthood's business model was specifically engineered to target them. And so then if you go to some of the op-eds, here is an op-ed by, interestingly enough, her. And this is one where she said, more African Americans have died from abortion than from AIDS, accidents, violent crimes, cancer, and heart disease combined. In America today, a black child is 3 times more likely to be killed in the womb than a white child. And since 1973, abortion has reduced the black population, by more than 25%. Planned Parenthood operates the nation's largest chain of abortion facilities, and almost 80% of these facilities are located in minority neighborhoods. About 13% of African American women are black, but they have more than 35% of the abortions. Now, at one point you might say, I need to see those facts and figures. On our website, we have not only this article, but I would appreciate the fact that, and I do appreciate the fact that Alveda King has links to each one of those. These are kind of HTML links, and so you can see how many African Americans have died from abortion. You can see the justification for the statistic that a black child is 3 times more likely to be killed in the womb than a white child, and then looking at the reduction of the population, and also a documentation for the fact that almost 80% of these Planned Parenthood facilities are located in minority neighborhoods. Then you have a couple of other things that have been posted here as well, and then I'll take some phone calls after the break, and that is one from Brent Bozell talking about this issue as well. And he said, really, more conservatives should be openly discussing Planned Parenthood's racist founder, Margaret Sanger. The vast majority of Americans don't know the truth. Even Republican pro-life leaders should vote against funding for Planned Parenthood, and the point directly to Margaret Sanger as the reason. Any organization who claims they're pro-life should be talking about Planned Parenthood's history of racism. It's a clarion call, and he says, talk about it. So again, we've posted this article, which first of all has the open letter from Alveda King and other co-signers to Planned Parenthood. Then it also has an op-ed from the Washington Examiner that goes into some more of the details so that you can see the facts and figures in case you want to make a case for yourself. And then Brent Bozell, as well as some other articles and material, all available at our website, pointofview.net. So let's take a break. First of all, I'd love to get your comments about this idea of prison reform and criminal justice reform. One of the reasons Kim Kardashian was in front of President Trump yesterday. Then I'd love to get your comments as well about Starbucks. Again, it is admirable that Starbucks wanted to address this issue of unconscious bias, maybe even racism. But what about the fact that it provides funding? And matter of fact, it even matches employees' donations to Planned Parenthood. Love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some of your phone calls right after these important messages.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. A couple of issues we put on the table, and that is prison reform or criminal justice reform, and also Starbucks, as well as some other topics we will get to in just a minute. Let me focus on those first. 1-800-351-1212. WLPE in Georgia. Kurt, you have the floor. What's your point of view?
Oh, thanks, Kirby. Yeah, I've been involved with Kairos Prison Ministry for about 32 years.
Great ministry.
And,
yes.
Yeah, I've spent 54 weekends in prison, and so it is need for reform, because I've noticed that some of the guys that I've talked to that have been incarcerated here in Georgia, they come from out of state, they got double the sentences that normally were given.
Yes.
So, there's some kind of inequity going on here, and I assume that the lady we're talking about, Ms. Johnson, that must have happened in her case. But in any case, the only way to get to what's going on is that we have to take the love of Jesus into prison. And Kairos' motto is listen, listen, love, love. And I can tell you there's a transformation that takes place on that weekend with these guys. As I tell my people at church, I say I go to prison to see Jesus. So it's an important ministry that has to be.
Let me ask you this question, because almost every time we've had a conversation about this, and we've had, if you've listened to this program for a while, we've tried from time to time to bring in chaplains that are involved in prison ministry. We brought in a former warden that's been on prison ministry, but we've also talked to some of the researchers, and to a person, they say that I thought I was going into the prisons to minister to them, but in some respects, that prison ministry ministered to me even more so. Have you found that to be the case?
Oh, yeah. That's why I say I go to see Jesus when I go in, because it works. It helps me, okay, in my ministry, okay? I'm a priest, Episcopal priest, and the issue is that it bolsters my relationship with Jesus also. One, to see that the transforming love of Jesus and forgiveness is the key to the thing, all right? That's what has to happen. And once you get the men, to recognize that and to see Jesus' love and to get rid of all the unforgiveness that they've got going on in their life, okay, then that's what bolsters them up and probably leads to, again, so that a low recidivism rate so that they don't come back. That's what's important.
Well, let me, if I can, for just a minute, since we're talking about that particular issue, mention that I did a commentary a while back called More God, Less Crime, and I really want to encourage people to go on our website to find it, because what I was doing was quoting from some of the research in a book entitled that, More God, Less Crime. It's Byron Johnson, who is a professor at Baylor. And first of all, he's reminded us that when you look at prison ministries, and the ones he mentions are Kairos, Prison Fellowship, and Bill Glass, although there are many others, but those are the three he spends most of his time talking about. He has found that these are the individuals and these are the groups that he has been able to document with statistical certainty that have such a profound and positive impact on the prisoners, and then makes the case that at a time when we are seeing kind of a cutback in various budgets, state budgets for prisons and things like that, Kurt, that's all the more reason why people should support things like a Bill Glass or Prison Fellowship or Kairos prison ministry, because in some respects that is the best and in some respects the only hope to really bring about the kind of change that we would want to have, so that we bring these individuals back into our communities and we don't have them heading back to prison within the next couple of years.
Exactly, because what they're doing, it's like people go to college to get a better education. These guys end up going in there, get a better education on how to do crime. And so they learn more and they become better at it, unless you intervene with the love of Jesus to turn them around from that.
Well, Kurt, I really appreciate you starting us off today. Thank you for calling, and thank you for being involved in such a great ministry.
Thank you.
Let me just mention real quickly that that particular article, you can type in More God, Less Crime, or you can find the book. And I don't know if we have any legislators listening out there. And just a little bit later, I'm going to be talking to the lieutenant governor in the state of South Carolina, who is running for governor, so I'll maybe suggest it to him and some others. But the book is really helpful in two ways. Number one, it documents in academically rigorous ways the positive impact that I think many of us have already seen anecdotally. Have we all at one time or another been involved with Angel Tree, or maybe gone to a Build Class evangelistic outreach or Kairos prison ministry, something like that, or we've heard people that have. Well, this really provides the academic firepower for that to demonstrate how successful those ministries are. And number two, the book also deals with what he calls the last acceptable prejudice. I know this will not surprise most of you listeners. The bias that's in the universities today is to not look at faith-based ministries, or to say, well, they aren't all that successful. And he's really concerned, Dr. Byron Johnson is concerned, that these faith-based ministries and the message doesn't resonate with a lot of the social scientists. So as a result, oftentimes they don't really understand how significant they are. So this is why I think this is such an important series of books, resource studies, and the rest. At the end, he has a review of all the literature so that churches and faith-based organizations can really begin to deal with the skeptics out there, because, again, the title, More God, Less Crime, pretty amazing, and it illustrates, again, the power of that. Well, we're talking about that. You know, there's another book that John Lott had, and More Guns, Less Crime. And that was the same idea, that sometimes guns are a solution, a possible solution that we've talked about here on Point of View. But there are some pieces that Jim Garrity has posted recently. One, an important consensus on school shootings, the media, and the Columbine culture, in which he says now even the New York Times, and I underscore, even the New York Times is agreeing with some of the things we've talked about here, because the New York Times talks about it differently. The other day I mentioned the fact that Malcolm Gladwell talks about the fact that since Columbine, each successive shooting has lowered the threshold. Well, New York Times article looks at it a little differently, but it says, quote, the school shooting copycat syndrome has grown more pervasive and has steadily escalated in recent years, and much of it can be traced back to the two killers at Columbine, previously ordinary high school students who had achieved dark folk hero status. Their followers, now known as Columbiners, in the corners of the internet where they are carefully planning massacres. And so these investigators are now stating that these school shootings have become the American equivalent of suicide bombings. I'm going to do a commentary on this. Just recently, I talked about the fact that these shootings are sort of like a slow motion riot where each action lowers the threshold for the next one. In other words, if there's a riot, the first person throwing a rock through the window, then another person who may never have been the first one to throw a rock through the window sees one rock through the window, so they pick up a rock and throw it through the window. Then the first person to go in and steal a television set, other people who would never think about looting a store, it lowers the threshold than they do. So that's one way to look at what is happening with these school shootings. The other is the New York Times article saying that the school shootings have become the American equivalent of suicide bombings, not just a tactic but an ideology. Young men, many of them depressed, alienated, or mentally disturbed, are drawn to the Columbine subculture because they see it as a way to lash out at the world and get the attention of a society that believes bullies and ignores or misunderstands them. I'll get back to that in just a minute, but I want to kind of develop that argument for a while, and then we'll also get some phone calls in that regard. But let me take at least another phone call here on the importance of the gospel in the prisons. So we'll go to South Carolina this time, WAGP. Virgil, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, Kerby, how are you, man?
Very good. What would you like to add?
Well, first of all, I want to say, once again, I enjoy your program. I've called in before, actually on this topic before concerning those in prisons, having done some prison ministry myself. And I so agree with the last caller concerning that issue. What we need to look at too, the average age when these guys go to prison, they're kind of childish in mindset and behavior.
Right.
But there is a lot of growth that takes place in the system. Having more time to study, many study false philosophies and religions. Of course, we know that. But what a great opportunity for believers to go into those prisons and minister to these guys and not just simply give them a second chance at life, i.e. the gospel, but also to reform them, to prepare them to come out in society. And I think this is where the church and Christian business owners and so forth really need to come together. And how can we help these guys to be able to function outside of the system? We've trusted in Jesus Christ inside. Will God supply for us on the outside? Well, I think God uses the body in which to do so. What a great testimony. I have family members that have spent time in prison, and they've come out, and I mean, for the past 7-8 years or so that they've been out, been unsuccessful in finding good jobs because society just doesn't want to give them a second chance. But by the grace of God, God has opened up some doors, and some have found an opportunity to work and to be productive citizens and not getting in trouble again.
Good. Can I keep you over the break? I have one of those mandatory breaks. I'd love to hear some more of your comments. And if you can stay, we'll pick it up right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The United States Army is known for its uniform appearance, and you've probably seen pictures of new recruits sporting a clean-shaven look. Recently, the Secretary of the Army announced new religious accommodation guidelines. Brigade-level commanders may now grant religious accommodations to servicemen and women who wear beards, turbans, or hijabs for religious reasons. Sikhs are expected to see the most immediate benefit. For years, Sikhs have litigated orders to remove their religiously required beards and turbans. The new guidelines should solve much of the unnecessary restrictions previously placed upon those freely exercising their religion by means of grooming requirements. Retired Army Chief Chaplain and Southern Baptist minister Douglas Carver sees benefit to the Army's broad protection for the religion of soldiers. According to Carver, soldiers are prepared to go to battle and, if need be, die. For soldiers, it is the practice of religion that most often brings courage and calmness. It's hard to imagine a finer force that protects religious liberty and all liberty on the planet than the United States military. As our service members work to protect our liberty, we ought to do what we can to preserve their religious liberty in service to our country. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. I notice a lot of our callers here from South Carolina. We're going to be talking with the Lieutenant Governor, Kevin Bryant, for just a little bit later in the second hour here today as he is running for the governorship. And let me just mention that if you think about the issue of prison ministry, Matthew 25, verse 36, good example. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. And so very important. And Virgil, I think you would agree with that. In some respects, we need to be in the prisons to bring the love of Jesus Christ and to spread the gospel. Don't you agree?
Absolutely, Kirby. Absolutely. What an opportunity. They're there. They're thinking life, society has given up on them. People have given up on them. But to be there and say, but God has not given up on you, I think is precious in their hearts. And I really think that makes a great impact. And not to mention the idea that, the way you've heard the saying, the darker the night, the brighter the light. The way that the Christians are being portrayed in society right now, this is an awesome time in which to show the very opposite of what people are saying about us. And to go in that prison and to share the love of Christ with these people, and then to follow up with them when they get out, to see that they're plugged into maybe a Christian business owner who may understand the picture of a second chance, because a lot of them, they just don't get it. I mentioned about a friend of mine, he was in prison and came out and struggled for years to get a job and was wondering, like, what's going on? I'm a Christian now, like, they don't want to give me another chance. He's been in there for like 10, 15 years. Went there as a little kid, man, coming out now as a young man, he's changed. And he wants the opportunity now to live in society. And I think Christians need to get with the church, business owners, and I think we need to devise some plan in which to snatch these people from the flames of hell by way of getting them plugged in to the economic system, to give them an opportunity to show that Christ has truly infiltrated their life, changed their life, and now they're living for his glory.
Well, again, thank you for your ministry, and thank you for once again sharing a great vision that you have for us. So, Virgil, thank you. I look forward to the next opportunity.
Amen, brother.
Let's, if we can, go to another caller in South Carolina. And Jody, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Yeah, hi, Kerby. Hi, everybody. I'm a prison volunteer at a men's prison. I'm actually a area coordinator for 3 Toastmaster prison clubs. And although it's not a spiritually based, faith-based organization, I have seen men and inmates turn around their lives by just thinking about their early legacy and redefining their legacy through public speaking and leadership opportunities that Toastmasters offers. And I want to say I am hooked up with a group in South Carolina that ministers, the Charis group and the authentic manhood and all of that. And there's one prison here in South Carolina that's doing a great job getting people trained in certain areas. And if I could just add to the conversation one thought, I've recently read an article about licensing problems when these inmates are getting training for vocation after their release. They're unable to get the license in order to do their job. So I just want to add to the conversation about Toastmasters being an effective program. There's a quote out there, I guess Cheryl Richardson said, the moment a person feels that they've been heard, they start to heal. And I'm seeing that all over the place. Although it's not a faith-based organization, it is a tremendous opportunity for moral compass to be redefined, a legacy to be re-examined and then redefined. And someday I'm going to be an agent for these guys. They're amazing speakers.
Very good. So it's just another opportunity. They're open doors. So, Jody, thank you for your ministry that you have there as well.
Well, thank you for letting me share. Thank you.
And again, a lot of this came, in case you just happen to be joining us, I know people tune in and tune out all the time. Kim Kardashian West was actually in front of the president yesterday and received some criticism about, why are we allowing celebrities to speak to the issue? Well, I don't know, maybe back in the 1990s when we had Jessica Lange and a variety of other people like Sissy Spacek and Jane Fonda address farm policy, maybe it would be appropriate there, but she really wasn't so much being an expert or claiming to be an expert as to really just wanting to be an advocate for this one woman. Alice Marie Johnson, 63-year-old individual, was convicted back in 1996 on 8 criminal counts related to cocaine trafficking, although she did not actually distribute cocaine. She did not set up any of the deals, but she was involved in relaying coded messages and received, in a sense, the same sentence as the kingpins, and it has life imprisonment. And so that's one of the issues that I just wanted to bring to the forefront, because I think we're going to be hearing quite a bit about this issue of criminal justice reform and prison reform. That was something we were going to talk about last Friday when we had Debbie Georgiadis and Kelly Shackelford. We just didn't get to it because so many questions surfaced on the subject of religious liberty. We never got to that particular article, but it's coming. And I thought it would be good for us to not only recognize how important it is to rethink some of the sentencing guidelines, especially the mandatory sentencing guidelines, which I think are putting nonviolent first offenders behind bars, and to consider alternatives, but also to recognize, as I mentioned just a minute ago, that very famous book by criminologist Byron Johnson, More God, Less Crime. And even though we've been talking about primarily with Virgil and Jody, South Carolina, if you go to our listeners up there in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, they are probably somewhat familiar with what has been called the Boston Miracle. And that's where you had, interestingly enough, a number of pastors working together with police, and they were actually able to break the stranglehold that gangs had in the community. And that all happened through a group called the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise. They created what were called violence-free zones. And if you are in a community right now where you're worried about gangs, this is another possible solution that is being put forward of actually having the joint venturing of pastors and police to make a difference. And so, again, that book talks about that in some detail. But whether we're talking about keeping young people out of prison or whether we talk about the ministry of those in prison, and I just mentioned Matthew 25, verse 36, about the fact that I was in prison and you came to me. What we do for a prisoner, in a sense, is what we are doing for Jesus Christ. And so I hope that you'll see that as a really important ministry. Since we've had a couple of you calling in from South Carolina, it's kind of appropriate that I thought we'd, from time to time, talk with various individuals running for a statewide office. Even though it's a national program, I think we can learn a lot from individuals that are running in particular states. Maybe it will be an encouragement to you. And so we'll be talking with Kevin Bryant, who is the Lieutenant Governor of the state of South Carolina. Then we're going to be talking about U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, who, of course, is a senator from Texas. And so we'll get into some of those issues. And I'll come back to this whole issue of whether those in the media are actually perpetuating, unintentionally, but perpetuating a sense in which they're making future school shootings more likely. And this is why I have said from the very beginning that I don't actually mention the names of those school shooters or other mass shooters, because I think it just encourages that. And now, interestingly enough, whether you look at the writings of Malcolm Gladwell, and I've got a commentary coming out next week on that, or you look at this new article and this analysis that is appearing in the New York Times, they're all coming to similar conclusions, sometimes through different kind of analysis, that these copycat shootings or the lowering of the thresholds in sort of what looks like a short-term or maybe slow motion riot, or as the copycat syndrome was talking about, maybe what we are, in a sense today, having an American equivalent of suicide bombings. We need to rethink how we publicize some of these school shootings. And we're going to spend some time talking with Ted Cruz about what we can do to harden some of the targets, the schools, and what Governor Greg Abbott in Texas has proposed and what U.S. Senator Ted Cruz has proposed. So we've got a lot to cover. We'll do all of that right after these important messages.
Every big story in human history began with one person. Point of View Radio has sparked many stories during the past 5 decades.
I'm 25 years old, and I've been listening to Point of View for about 12 years now.
I can't say enough about how it's touched my life and changed me completely.
The effect was incredible, and it was immediate.
I mean, I've seen Congress turn around.
There was a transformation that really did take place.
Oh, you missed your cue. This is where your story belongs. How has Point of View made a difference in your life and your community? We want to hear your story, and when you share it, you'll automatically be entered in a drawing for an iPad mini, and if we share your story to inspire others, we'll send you a Bible stick, an audio New Testament that you can take anywhere. So tell us your story before June 1st at pointofview.net/story, or call 1-855-335-2100. You could win an iPad mini, and your story may encourage someone else to make a difference. 855-335-2100 and pointofview.net/story. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Noticed a number of our callers last hour from South Carolina, so you will certainly appreciate this conversation we're going to have with the Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina. Let me just give you a program note as well. Senator Ted Cruz was supposed to join us. Right now, you have President Donald Trump in Houston. Ted Cruz, of course, is a senator from Texas. He's in Houston with him. It's beginning to be more obvious that we'll probably just have Ted Cruz on tomorrow. That will be a much easier interview to pull together. So we'll just postpone him till tomorrow, our weekend edition. And that'll be good because he and Kelly Shackelford are the best of friends. So I'd love to hear some of Kelly's comments as well. We'll still spend some time talking about the issue of school shootings. And in particular, we've posted some of the recommendations that came down from Governor Greg Abbott, who's the Texas governor, which applies to all of us. So we'll get into that and get into some of the school shootings in just a minute. But let me, if I can, welcome to the microphone an individual who is lieutenant governor in the state of South Carolina running for governor, and that is Kevin Bryant. He is a graduate in the University of Georgia with a bachelor's degree in pharmacy and has been involved with his brothers and father on pharmacy and pharmaceutical issues, was elected to, first of all, the South Carolina State Senate, served there for 12 years. Individual that, of course, is now the lieutenant governor. We have a link to his website, and he has, of course, been a voice for limited government, lower taxes, and supporting traditional family values. Kevin Bryant, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. Thanks for having us. How in the world are you?
We are good, and I've become more aware of your particular campaign. And I thought for just a minute, before we get into how the campaign is going, I thought I'd mention that on your website we have a lot of your posts. One of those relates to something we talked about in the first hour, and that's Planned Parenthood. You know, this week, of course, Starbucks decided that it would address the issue of unconscious racial bias. Good for them, and grateful that they did. But one of the articles we've posted is coming from people like Alveda King, who is the niece of course, the slain civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr., and others saying, well, Starbucks, if you're really concerned about racism, why is it that your company matches employees' donations to Planned Parenthood? I noticed that your April 13th post on your website talked about the whole issue of Planned Parenthood funding, and I know that you're pro-life, so speak to that issue. Should the voters and the citizens of South Carolina support Planned Parenthood?
Absolutely not, Kerby. Evil organizations like Planned Parenthood should not receive a single penny of taxpayer dollars, even if it's for a vitamin C. Our State Department of Environmental Health Control does not send any money to Planned Parenthood, but we do send some Medicaid dollars to Planned Parenthood in our family planning part of our budget. And I wrote a plan to defund Planned Parenthood. You'd have to reject $32 million of federal money. But when you're talking about a state budget of $28.5 billion, it's certainly worth rejecting $32 million to not send any service whatsoever to an abortion provider. And the taxpayers of South Carolina don't appreciate their money going to abortion providers like Planned Parenthood. We wrote this amendment, had a good fight in the Senate. It lost. The amendment passed overwhelmingly in the House. The final version of the budget has not passed yet. So we are doing everything we can to defund Planned Parenthood.
Let's, if we can, talk about some of the other issues. And again, if you'd like to ask a question, we'll have him on for about a half an hour. So, again, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. But certainly when you're talking about taxpayer dollars, I know that you are known as a proponent of limited government and of trying to reduce taxes. And this is at a time when state government budgets seem to be exploding. Now, they seem to be going up faster in some of the so-called blue states than the red state. But what do you think you could do as governor, having served also in the state Senate of South Carolina, to limit the size and scope of government and reduce taxes?
Well, Kerby, unfortunately in South Carolina, we only have one branch of government. Our founders envisioned three branches, a legislative, a judicial, and executive branch. We have the strongest legislature in the nation in South Carolina and the weakest executive branch. So as governor, I will use the bully pulpit to take the message to the taxpayer. And when you do that, the legislature will respond. And we have a Republican majority in the House, Republican majority in the Senate in South Carolina. We do not have a conservative majority. It's very easy for someone to just put an R by their name, go by the Republican platform, and as soon as they get elected, they start holding hands with Democrats and raising taxes. We have a big problem of that in South Carolina. That's why during our campaign, I quote Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. I have a record of not only voting against tax increases, but filibustering tax increases. Being a pharmacist, I've identified $34 million that we were spending on 4 drugs. We took on the big pharma lobby, cut through the propaganda, and we got that done. There was a proposal to dredge our port here in Charleston. We needed to do that, but the tax collectors wanted to not raise taxes, but do something even worse and put this state into debt, which taxes your children and your grandchildren. They held up that bill. And I was having CEOs from our manufacturers saying, don't you support industry and our economy? And I said, I absolutely do. We need to dredge our port, but we need to find money on hand. And we were able to do that. So I have a record of limited government. I have a record of filibustering tax increases, filibustering issues that violate our individual liberties and freedom of speech, our Second Amendment rights. And it's just been a blessing to travel all across our beautiful state and have a conversation with taxpayers one-on-one, find out what's on their minds. And it's going very well. We're really blessed to have this opportunity.
Well, let me take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about regulation and economic development. Some studies show that the cumulative effect of regulation, about $4 trillion, that's with a T. Of course, that's nationwide. But what does that mean in South Carolina? And again, can other states listening in right now learn some of those lessons? So we'll talk about some of that. And, of course, if you'd like to join the conversation, ask a question, we certainly do welcome your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. If you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to know a little bit more about this, maybe you're in South Carolina and would like to know more about his campaign, or you'd like to read some of his blog posts and say, well, I'd like to take that idea and apply it to my state, we certainly encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net, and we have a link to kevinbryant.com. You can find it either way, and again, you don't have to know how to spell his name. It's all there at the website, and we'll come back and chat with him for a little bit longer and then get into some of those regulations that might actually make a difference, and that is some actual requirements to keep schools safety. There is a whole school safety discussion that's been taking place. As a matter of fact, Ted Cruz was part of that. Governor Greg Abbott was, and I want to share that with you because maybe some of the lessons learned in whether it's South Carolina or Texas can apply to your state. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Earlier this month, the Supreme Court struck down the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act that barred state-authorized sports gambling with some exceptions. New Jersey plans to join Nevada as another state that will allow legal sports betting. Other states like Delaware, New York, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia will probably follow. I wondered how long it would be before the professional sports associations would react to the decision. We didn't have to wait for long. The NFL said that it had a long-standing and unwavering commitment to protecting the integrity of the game. They called on Congress to get involved because of the potential harm posed by sports betting and the concern this could erode the public confidence in these events. In my chapter on gambling, in Christian Ethics in Plain Language, I explained the potential problem. Gamblers bet on the point spread. Suppose a team was picked to win by more than 3 points and was leading by 1 point with less than a minute left. Even if the team was on its opponent's 20-yard line, the coach might decide not to kick a field goal. For doing so might risk the possibility of a block kick. Can you imagine the fans and gamblers who would want to call for an investigation? In my book, I acknowledge that the Bible does not directly address gambling, but there are numerous biblical principles that can be applied. Gambling can breed a form of covetousness and is often a destroyer of the work ethic. Gambling often corrupts values of hard work and thrift, replacing them with dependence on luck and chance. Gambling can be a family-destroying addiction. Many gamblers fall prey to the gambler's fallacy by believing that a string of losses makes the next win more likely. In fact, some have called gambling just another mind-altering drug. Unfortunately, it looks like sports gambling will spread to a number of states, joining the many other forms of state-sponsored gambling. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Lieutenant Governor Kevin Bryant with us. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's, if I can, for just a minute, Kevin, acknowledge how incredible South Carolina has been. It's a relatively small state, and yet you just think about all the people from South Carolina that we know about. Tim Scott and Trey Gowdy. Of course, they have a new book out. Lindsey Graham, Nikki Haley, Jim DeMint, Joe Wilson. The list goes on of those of us around the country that are aware of people from South Carolina. I always say that South Carolina is kind of punching above its weight in terms of the kind of impact that it's having nationwide. Wouldn't you think?
I would say so, Kerby. South Carolina is a beautiful state. How many states can you be on the coast and be in the mountains in the same day?
Pretty amazing. Well, I need to get back there, and I'm looking forward to maybe having a chance to meet you. I get to go there once in a while because we have some listeners, of course, as you well know, from that state, as well as others. But let's again talk about some of these principles, whether you're in the state of South Carolina or not, that we can apply. And we've talked about limited government. Of course, we talked about Planned Parenthood, but let's talk about economic development. I've been very impressed with what South Carolina has been able to do, but you've got more work to do. It seems to me that there are some regulations, whether at the federal level that President Trump is trying to cut back, or at the state level that actually can be reduced so that you can begin to develop businesses and really begin to encourage entrepreneurship. So what, if you were the governor, would you try to do in terms of dealing with this regulatory burden?
Kerby, I would tell you that the best regulator is free market consumer choice. And it's just very simple. Any of your listeners that chose to go out to eat the most recent time they went out to eat, did they go because of government regulation, or did they go because they were getting a good meal and a good price? The free market with consumer choice always gets you a better product at a lower cost. Kirby, we had a ridiculous bill passed in South Carolina that said every restaurant must have either paper or a plastic covering on the straw for their drink. Now, is that a good idea? If I owned a restaurant, probably yes. But we've got to separate what we think and what we think is good and what we think is bad from the role of government. That is something that the free market can decide. If I go to a restaurant and there's not a wrapper on my straw, you know what? I can go somewhere else. It's just on and on and on. I had a restaurant in the upstate that was fined, get this, because his refrigerator was too cold. Now, the worst thing I could think of is maybe I get a salad and my lettuce is a little bit frozen. I don't see a health hazard because someone's refrigerator is too cold. But it is absurd of all the regulations we have on small business, and it's killing us. And here again, we've got to separate good business practices from the role of government that can be decided by the free market.
One of the things you talk about also on your website is the issue of college education. And again, when you think of South Carolina, you think of, of course, the University of South Carolina, you think of the Citadel, you think of Charleston, you think of Clemson, you think of Furman. But again, the cost of education is skyrocketing as well. And this comes from a parent that had to pay for 3 tuitions for my own kids. And I know you've struggled with that as well. Is there anything that a governor can do or the legislature can do to address this issue of education, especially the cost of college education?
Well, there is, Kirby. Colleges are always broke. Kids are always building. I'm in Columbia right now, and there's about 4 cranes I can see from our apartment of building and building and building. And they pile this on the tuition that our students have to pay. And I do see online education that's coming around. That's going to lower the costs. But the problem we have in South Carolina is we have over 30 public universities. For a small state, that's a lot. And we don't have a board of regents in South Carolina. Our neighbors over in Georgia have a board of regents that keep the universities in their own mission. Well, we have mission creep. Universities are getting into economic development and getting into all these things that don't involve teaching our kids. Another thing in South Carolina is, hard work is honorable, and I don't want to begrudge anyone for doing manual labor. But when you look at low-skilled jobs, mid-skilled level jobs, and then your high-skilled, which takes a 4-year degree or more, we have 60,000 unfilled jobs at that mid-skilled level. So we have a fantastic technical college system that is affordable. We have jobs just waiting on students as soon as they get out, and they don't have this tremendous amount of debt as if they went to a higher ed. Some of these degrees in welding and electrical engineering, you can get out of school and make $50,000, $75,000 a year without the enormous amount of debt. That's good money. And the stereotype of a tech school degree is going away. There used to be a stereotype that there was actually something wrong with that, but that's going away, and we see a lot of our kids going into the tech schools and getting out making really good money without an enormous amount of debt.
I think a lot of that has to do with the popularity of the TV show Dirty Jobs, but nevertheless, there's just some
that could be.
Very good. That could be. Just about out of time. Let me, since I did mention education, I know that one of the other things that you've talked about that I've seen on your website is promoting your liberty, especially for parents, recognizing that you need to have parental control over education. Earlier this week, we talked about how some parents feel like they've lost control in some of these other states over issues like sex education, curriculum development. What are you proposing that would allow parents to once again have control over their children's education?
Well, I'll give you an answer that we've already talked about is free market consumer choice. We need to have school choice. We don't have school choice for every child in this state. I support that. We had a vote when I was in the Senate, and we fell short a few votes. That would have been a field goal. I came back with a school choice that only applies to exceptional needs children, and it's working very, very well for the students and for the parents. In South Carolina, our education spending ranks about 24th nationally. But when you look at our results, they're either at the bottom or very close. So it's not the spending. And we put these free market principles in our education and put the parents in charge, and where these school districts will start treating parents like customers, that will transform our education. In states that have tried school choice, we always see that it brings the parent more involved in the education of their child. And I will always be a strong proponent of school choice. And because of the limited amount that we have in South Carolina, the opposition to school choice has softened up a great bit because it's working so well. So we just want to build on that until, the ultimate goal is to have every child have these options.
Just before we run out of time, let's mention that we have a link to your website, kevinbryant.com. Whether a listener is in the state of South Carolina or not, if they'd like to communicate with you or read some of the material that you've posted to begin to talk about how to bring back some of these important principles, limited government, lower taxes, traditional family values, they can go to that website, and we have that on our website. Talk about what is available as people do land on your website.
Well, the website has many other issues of things that we haven't talked about on our short time today on the radio. We do have a Facebook page, which, here again, it's an open forum. I'm a big believer in free speech. There are some of our friends from the left who tend to like to post things on a regular basis, but, as long as they're not using vulgar language, we let them do what they want to do. But here again, I have a very clear record of limited government, lower taxes, fighting for the liberty of the unborn. And my political philosophy is very simple: promoting your liberty and protecting your wallet. And that kind of sums it up. And, we don't have time to get into this, but we have a tremendous amount of corruption in South Carolina. And I introduced a bill called the South Carolina Racketeering Act that 33 states have passed. Well, we've got our own racketeering and mob-like activity here in South Carolina, and the integrity and character of the taxpayers in South Carolina is not reflected in their government. And it's time to restore integrity in our government and return this government back to the taxpayer.
Again, the word integrity runs through your website. And again, if people would like to know more about you, the campaign, or even benefit from some of the things you've written about, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. Kevin Bryant, I know you're a busy person, so I appreciate you giving us a half an hour today here on Point of View.
Thank you for your time, Kirby. I hope you have a great afternoon.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about how to address school safety. I want to share what is being proposed in the state of Texas, and I was hoping that Ted Cruz would be able to underscore that, but he'll be with us probably tomorrow to pick up some of the pieces that we will talk about today. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about are we doing some things, and I mean we in the media, that are making school shootings more likely, and are there some things that the media needs to stop doing? This is something that Jim Garrity with National Review has been talking about. This is something that David French has been talking about. This is something the New York Times has been talking about. Malcolm Gladwell has. It's time for us to talk about it here on Point of View. We'll do so right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. What do you think we can do to address the issue of school safety? This is something that the governor in the state of Texas has addressed. I know the governor in the state of Florida has as well, but let me just summarize some of this because this was something we're going to talk about with Ted Cruz. We will tomorrow when he joins us. But I thought I'd go through this in a little bit of detail just so that you can understand the extent to which certain states are now going to address this issue of school safety. This particular plan, put together by the governor of the state of Texas, Greg Abbott, actually includes 40 different recommendations, which shows you how extensive this might be. This calls, for example, increased law enforcement presence in the schools. It calls for strengthening existing campus security programs. Also calls for enhancing firearm safety, providing mental health evaluations, and a variety of others. And it really came from a roundtable of discussions that have been held this last week that actually got input from victims, from parents, from educators, from lawmakers, from law enforcement and policy experts. And so it is broken down into a couple of categories. The first is how to address the issue of Santa Fe, Texas, where the shooting took place. I won't spend a lot of time because that is specific there, but nevertheless, they're talking about deploying counselors, mental health resources, funding through the Department of Education, and the rest. So I'm going to move past that to get into, first of all, what can we do to make our schools safer? And then what can we do to prevent threats in advance? People that are working in this area use some interesting phraseology. I'll just use theirs. I think it's kind of bizarre, but that's okay. Before the boom and after the boom is what they say. Before the boom, in other words, before the gun goes off, what can we do to prevent these? And then once the gun goes off, after the boom, what can we do there? And in some respects, both are preventive, but there is a difference. So the part on making schools safer, first a recommendation is to immediately increase law enforcement presence at the schools. Now, some people might say, well, it's very expensive. Well, if you look at the budget that has actually been put together by the governor and by the experts, they're talking about, in round numbers, $110 million in total funding, but about $70 million of that is either already available or will soon be available. So some of this is just talking about redirecting existing programs or deploying people differently. But one of those is certainly law enforcement. Another is to train more school marshals and improve the program for that. So it would increase the number of school marshals. It would actually revamp the marshal training requirements to focus more time on firearms training and a variety of other things so that you have somebody there at the school who at a moment's notice could be called into action if indeed there is a school shooting. Number 3, to provide active shooter and emergency response training. That's, of course, what you've had, and it has a number of recommendations under that. The 4th is the idea of hardening campus facilities. And I mentioned this before. There's a rethinking of how to restructure the infrastructure of a school. Here's the problem. If you harden it too much, the school looks like a prison. But if you don't harden it enough and you allow multiple opportunities to enter into the school, you can see how that provides an opportunity for somebody with malevolent intentions. So this is obviously a difficult thing to balance, but there are ways in which to actually design schools to prevent security threats and not make it look like a prison. And so we'll see where that plays out over the next couple of months. Another one is to begin to prioritize increased federal funding towards immediate school safety improvements. And that's one of those ideas that as funding comes down, either from the federal level or from the state level, to begin to implement some of the restructuring, the infrastructure design and those kinds of things. And then finally, to strengthen existing campus security programs. So those are just a few quick statements that goes on for more than a page, so I'm really giving you a very fast summary of that to address the whole issue of making the schools themselves safer. Let's move on to the next point, preventing threats in advance. And that is to provide mental health evaluations that identify students at risk of harming others and provide them the help that they need. As we talked the other day with a member of Congress, Pete Sessions, he talked about checking with those in the FBI. If you get a tip, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to pass it along, or are you going to act on it? We, of course, have talked about the Promise program in Florida, which said, well, we want to prevent the school to prison pipeline, so when we have a threat, we'll make a point of not telling the law enforcement officials. We'll try to handle it on campus. But there's a problem with that, in that some of those individuals are actually, if you will, sort of almost waving, saying, look, I'm going to be a problem. I'm a danger. You need to act, and we don't sometimes act initially. Another one is increase mental health first aid training. Another is provide schools with behavioral threat assessment programs. The Texas School Safety Center has what is called the Sigma Threat Management to begin to evaluate some of that, to expand campus crime stoppers programs. Another one was to use digital technology, interestingly enough, to prevent attacks. And so there are some reporting systems that exist in that regard. To deploy more fusion centers to monitor social media for threats, because that oftentimes these individuals are expressing some kind of threat in social media, to act upon that. Then to improve mental health crisis response, and then also to increase the safety of charter schools, and then to remove from the classroom students who threaten teachers. Up until now, we've had a situation, and we talked about this the other day, at least in the local program, we talked about an individual that actually had threatened a teacher, had thrown things on the floor, looked like he was going to choke them. There is a tendency for sometimes the teachers, because they have to deal with those students every day, to say, I'm going to try to defuse the situation. As admirable as it is, there comes a point in time where I think we need to have a zero tolerance policy for students who commit an assault, because if they've assaulted a teacher, if they've assaulted another student, it's quite likely they might do it again. And so those are kind of a before the boom and after the boom kind of questions that are so often surfaced. What can we do if an individual is really intending to harm someone at a school? And most importantly, how can we maybe find those individuals beforehand so that we can prevent even the possibility of a school shooting? But the last recommendations, which I'll mention real quickly, are the whole area of enforcing and enhancing firearms safety. For example, they wanted to try to close critical information gaps to prevent shootings like that of Sutherland Springs. You might remember that was one of the big issues, that there was an individual who in this particular case, of course, went into a church to shoot people, but nevertheless, there was a problem with the gaps in the federal background checks. That's more a federal level issue, but again, schools can bring some pressure there as well. Study a protective order to keep guns out of the hands of those who are mentally unfit. We didn't talk about it on the air when I had Congressman Pete Sessions here, but we did talk about it off the air because there are opportunities now to actually use various protective orders if indeed you know that an individual might indeed want to harm an individual. Let's at least use those kinds of protective orders to prevent them from having access to firearms. I have dealt with this in 2 separate occasions, even with my extended family, when there were potential threats. And so we do this as individuals, as family members. Why can't we do this as various states and even federal government? Then mandate a reporting period to close gaps in federally mandated background checks, strengthen the safe firearm storage law, mandatory reporting of lost or stolen guns. I read that, I go, really? You mean if a gun owner loses a firearm, they aren't necessarily required to report that? This would be actually a requirement that a gun owner report when a firearm is lost or stolen, and to report that within 10 days. So as I read through this, I said, I think we have a few gaps. There are some things we can do, but again, as we've pointed out before, even in some of the research that's been done, the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, and the best way to actually even prevent the bad guy from having a gun is to identify those individuals that pose a particular threat. So that's just a brief summary, and I do believe brief, but if you'd like to read it, and if you'd like to apply some of these principles to your school or to your state, we have posted that on the website, pointofview.net, a nice summary of Governor Abbott's address and recommendations for school safety. We'll take a break. Have a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The United States Army is known for its uniform appearance, and you've probably seen pictures of new recruits sporting a clean-shaven look. Recently, the Secretary of the Army announced new religious accommodation guidelines. Brigade-level commanders may now grant religious accommodations to servicemen and women who wear beards, turbans, or hijabs for religious reasons. Sikhs are expected to see the most immediate benefit. For years, Sikhs have litigated orders to remove their religiously required beards and turbans. The new guidelines should solve much of the unnecessary restrictions previously placed upon those freely exercising their religion by means of grooming requirements. Retired Army Chief Chaplain and Southern Baptist minister Douglas Carver sees benefit to the Army's broad protection for the religion of soldiers. According to Carver, soldiers are prepared to go to battle and, if need be, die. For soldiers, it is the practice of religion that most often brings courage and calmness. It's hard to imagine a finer force that protects religious liberty and all liberty on the planet than the United States military. As our service members work to protect our liberty, we ought to do what we can to preserve their religious liberty in service to our country. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And for a few more minutes, let me just mention that one of the things that more and more social scientists are beginning to look at is, why do we have these mass shootings? And I've got a commentary coming out next week entitled Why Mass Shootings, and I've already sort of alluded to the fact that a lot of it goes back to an article that was written years ago, actually, by Malcolm Gladwell, in which he argued that we really have to look at, first of all, these shootings as being connected, and second of all, ask a question as to whether or not each action lowers the next threshold. And if you've heard me talk about this, you've heard me use the illustration. You know, if you've ever seen a riot on television, maybe you've ever been in a riot, the first person that throws a rock, all of a sudden somebody else who would never have thrown a rock now says, well, he threw a rock, so I throw a rock. And so it lowers the threshold where pretty soon people that would never have thrown a rock through a window now start throwing a rock through the window. A person that would never loot, would never go into a store and grab food or grab a television set or grab a computer or a stereo or whatever. Once they see other people doing it, they follow suit. And that has been the argument that the two killers, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, set a cultural script. And as a result, they had a website, they had movies, and there is now kind of this idea that there are others that want to be like them, and they're called Columbiners. And so that's why this whole idea that has been expressed over the last year or so is starting to catch fire. And it also comes back to some action items. But let me come back to Jim Garrity, because he put it this way. He said, this is what the New York Times said. So I'm quoting at the moment from the New York Times, and I'm going to quote from Jim Garrity. The New York Times article says the school shooting copycat syndrome has grown more pervasive and has steadily escalated in recent years. And much of it can be traced back to the two killers at Columbine. Previously ordinary high school students who achieved dark folk hero status, their followers, also known as Columbiners, in the corner of the internet where their carefully planned massacre is remembered, studied, and in some cases even celebrated. And so as a result, some are starting to say that maybe these school shootings are like the American equivalent of suicide bombers. Little different than the Malcolm Gladwell idea of this being a slow motion riot. But whether you use the slow motion riot metaphor or the American equivalent of suicide bombers metaphor, you're talking about individuals that now sometimes feel like it's justifiable for them to use violence. So the role of the media now, this again is from the New York Times, says in turning school gunmen into household names and perpetuating the infamous legacy they desire can be shown to have inspired additional attacks. Researchers at Western New Mexico University recently reported this. They also have been growing calls for withholding the names and the biographies of the school gunmen from newspapers and television coverage. The New York Times said it regularly identifies and profiles the perpetrator, though in order to focus attention on the issue of school shootings, not on the gunmen themselves. So, again, Jim Garrity says this, of course, is not a new conclusion. Since the Columbine shooting, people have asked, with good reason, whether media coverage, particularly articles and reports that take what was going through the shooter's mind tone, creates, if anything, an incentive for the angry, troubled teenage males. And so he quotes from various studies that have been done, and even quotes where sometimes individuals have written whole articles without ever mentioning the names of the killers, which I think is admirable and something we've tried to do here around Point of View. But he also recognizes perhaps it's unrealistic for the media to never name school shooters because it's part of the story. But is it too much to ask that the media minimize, he says, any coverage that could be seen as inadvertently glamorizing or sympathizing with the school shooters? So he wrote about that yesterday. Well, today he came back to the issue again because he points out that, as I mentioned yesterday, there's a growing consensus among criminologists that quite a few school shooters are motivated, at least in part, by a desire for notoriety and the extensive media coverage their horrific crimes generate. News articles and reports that discuss the shooter's life in detail are inadvertently glamorizing the shooters in the eyes of similarly disturbed and angry teenagers. While the news media obviously needs to cover school shootings when they happen, they need to be more careful to ensure their work does not carefully cultivate a greater incentive for other troubled young men contemplating the same path. And then he goes on to say, well, the Washington Post apparently didn't get the message. Talks about the fact that if you saw the article, it came in the Washington Post, and I don't encourage you to read it, and don't pass it on to any kids that might actually think about being a shooter. They actually go into the details of 3 video recordings made by the Parkland, Florida school shooter. Oh, great. So that's now out there and available on the website as well. And people can read that even in the Washington Post. And so, again, the link is available, and I just think it probably perpetuates some of this as well. So a little bit later, Jim Garrity, I think, makes a good point. He's very disturbed, as I have, of sometimes asking this question. Here's the question. The what drove him to do this question lets the shooter off the hook, at least inadvertently. We're looking for a cause, a trigger, some sort of action that causes a reaction. Except there's no action, he says, that justifies this, and the common narrative around school shootings tends to oversimplify and distort the actual events. Jim Garrity says the Columbine killers were not social outcasts bullied by jocks. Most people forget that. The school shooter in Marysville, Washington, was elected homecoming prince. So again, these are not always bullied individuals. As he also says, as you can gather, I hate the term drove him to this. This isn't Uber. It wasn't someone else who put him in the school with that gun. Every shooter who terrorizes a school makes a choice to do something evil. He's never forced to do this, never pulled alongside by some sort of unavoidable sequence of events and fate. Every last one of us has bad days and times when we feel like we're at the end of our rope. Very, very few of us decide the best way to handle our problems is to pick up a gun and shoot as many people as possible. Of course, most of us are horrified by the thought of infamy and being remembered for doing something terrible. Not all of us think like that, Jim Garrity says. And in a culture where not being famous has somehow become one of the worst imaginable fates, news organizations have an obligation to ensure that we do their jobs, but they aren't giving the worst among us exactly what they want. Thought it was a good piece, and if nothing else, just comes back to reinforce this idea. So whether you look at the Malcolm Gladwell idea that we're in the midst of a slow motion riot in which each action justifies another one, and you have this cultural script that was established by those two shooters in Columbine, or you look at some of the newest analysis that has come out suggesting that maybe we have in these school shootings the American equivalent of suicide bombings, we've got a problem, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. And this is why we have to come up with some solutions, and that's one of the reasons why I've posted today the 40 different recommendations by Governor Greg Abbott to address school safety in the state of Texas, and I think those could be applied to your state as well. That's all we have. Let me suggest that tomorrow we will get back to this issue because we will be talking then with U.S. Senator Ted Cruz about what he learned by being part of that Greg Abbott roundtable, and maybe some other comments as well about what we can do to make our schools and our culture safer. If you'd like to find a little bit more information on some of the people we've interviewed today, Michele Rigby Assad, Kevin Bryan, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. Tomorrow is our weekend edition. Benedextra, Kelly Shackelford. Want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Every big story in human history began with one person. Point of View Radio has sparked many stories during the past 5 decades.
I'm 25 years old and have been listening to Point of View for about 12 years now.
I can't say enough about how it's touched my life and changed me completely.
The effect was incredible, and it was immediate.
I mean, I've seen Congress turn around. There was a transformation that really did take place.
Oh, you missed your cue. This is where your story belongs. How has Point of View made a difference in your life and your community? We want to hear your story, and when you share it, you'll automatically be entered in a drawing for an iPad mini, and if we share your story to inspire others, we'll send you a Bible stick, an audio New Testament that you can take anywhere. So tell us your story before June 1st at pointofview.net/story, or call 1-855-335-2100. You could win an iPad mini, and your story may encourage someone else to make a difference. 855-335-2100. and pointofview.net/story. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.